Hi everybody, welcome to day 23 of the 30-day music mini challenge. Today's topic is defensiveness and blame and focusing on what we have control over. We all have to work on this in some way or another. We all have that moment where, it's the instrument, it's the reed, it's what I ate, it's who's listening to me. I don't feel comfortable in my own space, the environment. There are so many different things that get in our way, right? And that we end up putting a lot of blame on, right? A big one is time. There's a meme that's been going around about how I realize now that it wasn't time that was preventing me to clean my house, right? Now that a lot of us have a little bit more time, it depends on your situation. Some people have less time because they're working and childcare and, performing 4 jobs instead of just the one or the 2. And others of us have a little bit extra free time and we're finding, I didn't get to that because, I just didn't get to that. Nowadays, especially, there's some of those excuses are going away. But then we have new excuses and new blame. And it's really important to process through this, right? So as a music teacher, there are certain things that I come across most regularly. When I was working at Brandon Brothers Flute Makers, which is one of the most high quality flutes in the world, most professionals either play one of 3 brands, and Brandon is one of them. Major symphonies, a lot of them are full of Brandon flutes, really high end, and the technicians there are absolutely spectacular. And, we would have someone call in from a major orchestra, someone who's extremely accomplished, extremely professional, and say, there is something wrong with my flute, this thing doesn't work, and yada, yada, yada. And then we would have 4 or 5 technicians look at it, and they would all be like, I don't see it, don't hear it. Doesn't mean that all those situations weren't there. Some players are extremely sensitive to their equipment. But there are times where instead of making an adjustment, we blame the equipment, right? One of my favorite stories is there was a young woman who got into the New World Symphony, which is a pre-professional group, phenomenal group, and she was playing on a beginner flute. She got in on a beginner flute. Most of my students can't get into junior districts on a beginner flute in our area for middle school. And so this young woman, phenomenal young woman, got into the New World Symphony with this beginner flute. And it really comes to, what we do with what we have. And also, there's some talent involved in there, but most of it, I would say that talent is less of it and hard work is a lot more of it. It will take more time and more effort to figure out not the best equipment. We need to have the sound that we want to produce inside our head and then work very hard and diligently and for hours and hours on changing things up, constantly changing in order to improve, right? So we shouldn't try to blame the instrument. Reeds also come into that camp. I mean, obviously, we want the best reeds. We want reeds that respond. We want things that work, right? We want our instruments to work. That only makes us better players, right? So this is the goal, but that's not always possible. So we have to do what we can do with what we have and make adjustments. And that's really important. Another thing my students complain about a lot are interruptions. And that's hard. God knows I have 2 kids and I'm trying to get something done. And, sometimes I'm scattered between my teaching, the house stuff, their lessons, somebody's having a problem, so interruptions are hard. I know that when I'm alone by myself, I get so much done because I'm not interrupted, right? And my brain is not having to scatter in all sorts of different directions. But it's still not an excuse, right? And it's not a reason to be defensive, about what it is that you're doing or take it personally if someone's upset with you that you didn't get what you needed to done. It is what it is and you do the best you can, right? Time, right? Time can be an issue, absolutely. But a lot of times too, it's about structuring that time. It's about making a schedule. It's about creating a habit, creating a routine. This is really important. Tying in a meal with some practice. So like right before you prepare the meal, preferably. So if you're a wind player or brass wind player, you're not blowing all sorts of gunk into your instrument, or just brushing your teeth really well and rinsing it out. For singers, a lot of times, and for winds and brass, if we have too much milk, a lot of us may not have allergies, but we have a bit more mucus that we produce when we eat dairy products. And so there's a lot of blame and around the food that we eat, but we have control over that, right? For others, it's family pressure, or if you live in an apartment or a dorm or a small space. Who's listening to me? I don't want anyone to listen to me. That fear, right, of getting out there. I'll tell you one thing, most people don't care. Unless you're like practicing really like loud, long tones at 1:30 in the morning. Understandable that no one would really like that. But most of the time, if you're doing it in a reasonable hour, people don't mind, no matter what you sound like. So that's a really important thing to try to work through and get over. Because I know a lot of my students, especially in dorm life, get really insecure about practicing in front of people. And I get it. It's putting yourself out there. But the more you do it and the more you get used to it, it's helpful practice. And we ultimately want to practice like we perform and perform like we practice. We really want there to be no distinction. And so if having those other ears around make you a little intimidated, put your best foot forward, play slower so that you can nail more notes, really be able to focus on exactly what it is that you're doing. So there's a lot of ways around that. But one of the biggest things that I always hear in my studio is, I could do it at home, or I could do it yesterday. So this is a really important topic, which creates a lot of blame, and not necessarily blame, but defensiveness. But I could, but I did, but and so the reason why a lot of times we can't do it in a lesson is because, one, it's a different environment. As soon as we play in a new environment, things change in our brain. Our brain is used to rituals, habits, routines, right? Most of us probably practice in the same place when we do our work, right? If you practice for consistency, it gets to the point where it shouldn't matter what environment that you're playing in as far as to be able to nail your music. But for a lot of people, how they learn, and this relates to study skills as well, how they learn depends on their environment. So even just studying or practicing in a different space within the room, or a different room if you have the luxury of a different room in your home, or switching it up and playing outside, why not? Or singing outside. Pianists, obviously, that's a little trickier. But there, we can change up our environment to get used to that variety. And also, knowing that, when we can do it, how many times did we do it? How many times did we do it successfully? Did we get it just once? Or are we getting it every single time? And if we're not able to reproduce it in a lesson, what is happening? Why is that occurring? And that's what I work with a lot of my students on, because I know that one of the biggest causes of defensiveness is the idea, I know it, I know that. There's a difference between knowing and showing. And I talk about this all the time. We can know something, but doing it is a whole nother ballgame. Takes a whole new level of preparedness, thinking, structure, routine, habit, the way we practice, the way we learn. Oftentimes, we're taught to just pound something out over and over and over and over. Well, what that does is that helps to a certain point, absolutely. But then there gets to be a point where we're just cycling our short-term memory instead of really accessing that long-term memory. Learning should be hard. The harder that learning is, then the more long-term memory will kick in and we'll be able to remember more and have more success. So so it's that kind of attempt as well. Are you cycling through things, or are you just getting it until you got it and then moving on and not touching it again? Because that's not the best strategy for learning. There's so much research out there that tells us this. I'm a little bit obsessed with learning about how we learn. I find it just fascinating how the brain works. So knowing versus showing, because I often will tell students, you need to do this, or you need to do that, or I recommend doing this. Well, I know, or it was an accident. Well, yeah, I get it. But my job as a teacher is to point out what I can't hear or what you're not showing yet. And because you're not showing it, I don't know if you know it because I don't see it. And so a better question, if you're having that defensive moment, what can I do? You can ask your teacher, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to practice to make this more consistent? Because a lot of times there's a great quote. I have no idea if you know who originally said this. It's been, in my experience, it's been attributed to all sorts of different people. But there's been a quote in the music community for quite a long time. Amateurs play to get something right or sing. Professionals play or sing I messed up the quote. Amateurs, an amateur practices to get things right. A professional practices to not get things wrong. Woo! Total brain moment there. So amateurs oftentimes, and young students or adults too, will practice and then they'll just get it. And then ta-da! Not to mention that they played it incorrectly 30 times before. A professional will make sure that they repeat that passage, cycle back to it, and to make sure that they can play it consistently. Before, I would let go of a passage, even if it seemed like an easy passage, because it's the easy stuff that can really mess us up. So for me, I want to be able to play something 7 times in a row comfortably before I know I've got it, and before I stop cycling that material. But you do want to cycle your material because, like I said before, your brain can cycle in short-term memory. And so you will benefit from that practice, but not as much as if you make it a little bit harder. It's not as rewarding. You don't feel that I'm getting it because it's a little bit of a slower process, but it'll stick more on the long term. And so that's a really important point that we all need to remember. So we want to think about what you have control over. You can control how you approach your instrument. You can approach your mindset. You can approach how you think about things. You can approach your schedule in a way that, you're taking ownership of what you have time for. And if you really don't have the time for it, just instead of making an excuse, there is just no way, for your environment, control what you can, right? And for the rest, as performers, we have to deal with all kinds of distractions in order to perform. The show must go on, right? And so, dealing with that, if a teacher tells you something, know that the teacher is not attacking you personally. At least I certainly hope not. They're hopefully just making a statement about your playing. Sometimes people can make a statement about effort or what they see as effort. And it's your job to really look internally instead of fight or flight and, no, that's not right. Okay, look inward. What am I doing? What could I do better? What am I not showing? Why does she keep telling me this? There must be something that I'm not hearing. Maybe if I record myself, problem solve, think critically, and try to drop the blame, try to drop the defensiveness. This is so important. So, to the challenge. Your challenge today is to play. Just play your instrument. And if you find be aware of if any defensiveness or blame is in your thoughts or in your actions. When I was younger in particular, if something went wrong with a passage I was doing, and not all my students do this, but a lot of them do, I would give my flute a dirty look, like it did it, I'd be like playing along and then, like my flute had anything to do with the mistake, right? So really just be aware of what's going on. Try not to be judgmental, just be aware, right? And then think about what you can do differently to change that response. And my super challenge is to apply this to your regular life, right? It's really easy to blame our partners, blame our family. It's really easy to do that. It's harder work to look inside and really figure out what it is that we need to improve, what we need to work on, and how we can excel more. So good luck, everybody. Obviously, this is like a lifelong project, but it's so important to our music making because defensiveness and blame just gets in the way and prevents us from, making the best out of our own musicianship. Enjoy, everyone. Happy practicing. And please share, inspire others to do the same. Take care, everybody.